Some crimes should never happen in small towns, especially when they involve those who are supposed to protect law and order. My name is Alvin York, 48 years old, the last 15 of which I have been a detective with the Austin, Texas Police Department investigating murders that others would rather overlook. The call came in on a Friday, close to evening. I was just about to finish my shift and head home when the officer on duty gave me a message that sent a chill down my spine. His wife had been found dead at the home of County Sheriff Michael Bridges. The message came from the sheriff himself. I had known Michael Bridges for over a decade. We were not close friends, but we maintained a good professional relationship. Bridges earned the respect of his colleagues with his honesty and integrity. It was hard to imagine that a murder had taken place in his home. I knew the address by heart. 2 years ago, we celebrated Michael's 50th birthday there. The Bridges house was in the suburbs, in a quiet neighborhood with neat houses and manicured lawns. It was a 2-story colonial-style mansion surrounded by tall oak trees. When I pulled up, 2 patrol cars and a CSI van were already parked outside the house. Neighbors gathered in small groups along the street, whispering and watching curiously. News travels fast in neighborhoods like this. Officer Johnson met me at the yellow tape fencing the perimeter. His face was a mixture of shock and confusion. "Detective York, the body's on the 2nd floor in the bedroom. Sheriff Bridges is inside," he said quietly. I nodded and made my way into the house. Inside, everything looked perfect. No signs of struggle or disorder. Pictures of the happy family hung on the living room walls. Michael, his wife Nina, and their grown son Jason. In one of the pictures, they were standing by a lake, smiling as if nothing could dampen their happiness. Walking up to the 2nd floor, I immediately noticed the open door to the master bedroom. Michael Bridges was sitting in a chair in the hallway, dropping his head on his hands. I had never seen him so broken. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Alvin!" His voice was hoarse. "I found her when I got home." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Michael, I'm sorry. I have to examine the crime scene." He nodded, without saying a word. The bedroom was spacious and bright. Through the large windows penetrated the evening light, creating an almost peaceful atmosphere, which contrasted strangely with what had happened inside. Nina Bridges lay on the bed, dressed in a house robe. Her dark skin had taken on a grayish tint. Her eyes were open, as if in surprise. There were few traces of blood, only a small stain on the robe in the area of the heart. The medical examiner was already on the scene. She was one of the best in the business, attentive to detail and ruthlessly accurate in her conclusions. "Death occurred between 11 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon," she said, without taking her eyes off the body. The cause of death was a stab wound in the region of the heart. Judging from the nature of the wound, the murder weapon was a thin-bladed knife, about 15 to 20 centimeters long. I walked around the room, scrutinizing every detail. Nothing had been disturbed. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It looked like a crime committed by someone the victim knew and led into the house willingly. "No murder weapon found?" I asked Rachel. "No," she shook her head. "Forensics is still searching." I returned to the hallway, where Michael was still sitting. His eyes were red from crying, but his gaze remained clear. The sheriff, despite his grief, understood the procedure. He knew I needed answers. "Michael, I need to ask you some questions," I began as gently as possible. "Are you ready?" He nodded. "Tell me what happened today." "I left for work around 7 in the morning," Michael began. "Nina was home. She was working the 2nd shift at the clinic today. We had a normal breakfast together. No problems, no arguments." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I got home around 6 in the evening. The front door was unlocked, which surprised me. I called out to Nina, but she didn't answer. Went upstairs and found her." His voice shook. "She was already cold. I called 911 right away." "When was the last time you spoke to her?" "Around noon. I called to see if she needed anything on the way home. She said it was fine." "Did she mention any plans? About the fact that someone might be coming over?" Michael shook his head. "No, nothing like that." I knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful process. Michael had dozens of questions to answer, and many of them would be unpleasant. "Is there anyone who might have had a motive to hurt Nina?" I asked bluntly. Michael looked at me puzzled. "Alvin, who would think of killing a nurse, the sheriff's wife? We don't have any enemies." I nodded, but my experience told me that everyone had secrets, even the most ordinary people, even sheriffs' wives. I'll have to talk to the neighbors, I said. Maybe someone saw something. Sure, Michael agreed. I understand the protocol. As I left the house, I made my way to the assembled neighbors. Most of them knew me by sight since I'd been to a few of Michael's barbecues. Among them was an elderly woman, Mrs. Robinson, who lived across the street and was said to be the eyes and ears of the whole neighborhood. Mrs. Robinson, did you notice anything unusual today? I asked as I approached her. Detective York. She lowered her voice to a whisper. I saw a car pull up to the Bridges house around 12 noon. An old red Ford. It was driven by a young man. He was there for about an hour. Do you know who it was? Of course, Mrs. Robinson nodded. It was Marlon Craig, a friend of their son Jason's. He's been at their house a lot lately, especially when the sheriff's at work. I sensed a hint of something more slipping into her words. What do you mean? Mrs. Robinson lowered her voice even more. I don't want to spread gossip, detective, especially now, but I've seen Nina and that young man a few times being a little too friendly with each other, if you know what I mean. I kept a neutral expression on my face, though this information made me wary. An intimate relationship between the sheriff's 45-year-old wife and their son's 25-year-old friend? That could explain a lot of things. Are you sure you know what you're talking about, Mrs. Robinson? Detective, I've lived across the street from them for 15 years. I know when I see something wrong. 2 months ago, I saw them kissing in the backyard. Michael was at work at the time. I jotted this information down in my notebook, realizing that I would have to check Marlon Craig's alibi. I now had a suspect with a possible motive, although I wasn't sure what it was yet. Thank you for the information, Mrs. Robinson. Please, if you think of anything else, give me a call. I interviewed several other neighbors. 2 of them confirmed seeing Marlon's red Ford outside the Bridges house around noon. When I returned to the house, I found that CSU had finished their initial examination of the crime scene and was preparing to transport the body to the morgue. Did you find anything interesting? I asked the team leader. Nothing much so far, he replied. No prints, except those that should be in the house. No murder weapon has been found. Apparently the killer took it with him. I nodded and headed back upstairs where Sheriff Bridges was packing up to spend the night elsewhere. His son Jason had just arrived and was standing next to his father, looking shocked and confused. Michael, I need to ask you one more question, I said. What do you know about Marlon Craig? The sheriff looked up at me with a look of confusion. Marlon? He's been a friend of Jason's since high school. He's a good guy, works as an auto mechanic at a shop on Oak Street. Why? Neighbors saw his car outside your house around noon today. Jason intervened in the conversation. Marlon, he would never. I turned to him. Jason, when was the last time you saw Marlon? 3 days ago. We watched a basketball game together. Do you know if he had any dealings with your mom? Jason frowned. What kind of business? What do you mean? I realized that my son didn't know anything about a possible relationship between his mother and his friend, or pretended not to know. I'm just finding out why he might have been visiting your house when no one but your mom was around. Michael put his hand on his son's shoulder. Jason, the detective is just doing his job. He has to check out all the possibilities. I nodded to the sheriff, grateful for the understanding. I'll need to talk to Marlon. Do you have his contact info? Jason silently pulled out his cell phone and dictated Marlon's number to me. I wrote it down, realizing this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. I want you both to know that I'm going to do everything I can to find whoever did this, I said, looking first at Michael, then at Jason. The sheriff nodded, his eyes full of pain, but also determination. Thank you, Alvin. I know I can count on you. As I left the Bridges house, I was already mapping out a plan of action in my head. The first order of business was to question Marlon Craig. If he was really in the house at the time Nina was killed, and if there really was an affair between them, it gave him both an opportunity and a potential motive. Getting in my car, I dialed Marlon's number. The dial tone went on for a long time, but no one answered. Perhaps he already knew what had happened and was avoiding contact with the police. I started the engine and headed toward Oak Street, where Marlon's auto repair shop was located. The city was falling into twilight, but my workday was just beginning. I felt that this case would be one of the most difficult of my career, not only because of the victim's personality and her husband's high position, but also because of the dark tangle of relationships that was beginning to unravel before my eyes. The auto shop was closed, but the lights in the windows were still on. I knocked on the door, and a few seconds later, a heavy-set man with a graying beard opened the door. "What can I do for you?" he asked unfriendly. "Detective Alvin York," I introduced myself, showing my badge. "Looking for Marlon Craig." "Marlon left around 5 o'clock. Anything wrong? Just need to talk to him. Do you know where I can find him?" The man shrugged his shoulders. "I have no idea. Maybe at home, maybe at a bar. Who knows where these young guys hang out?" I wrote down Marlon's address and thanked the shopkeeper. On the way out, I called the station and requested a warrant for Marlon Craig's arrest for questioning. There wasn't enough evidence yet to charge him with murder, but he needed to be found and interviewed as soon as possible. As I pulled up to Marlon's house, a small bungalow on the outskirts of town, I noticed that the lights were off. After knocking several times and receiving no answer, I peered through the window. The house looked empty, but in the driveway was the same red Ford the Bridges' neighbors had talked about. Either Marlon was home and didn't want to open it, or he'd left the house on foot. Either way, he became the prime suspect in the case. The young man who had an affair with the sheriff's wife was the last person to see her alive before she was murdered. I got in my car and radioed the precinct. "Detective York speaking. Put out a bolo for Marlon Craig for questioning in the murder of Nina Bridges. Age 25, approximately 5 feet tall, dark skin, short hair. Last seen in the Oak Street neighborhood around 5 p.m. "Copy that, detective," the duty officer replied. "Patrol cars have been notified." I leaned back in my seat, thinking about how quickly life could change. This morning, Michael Bridges was a respected sheriff with an impeccable reputation and a seemingly perfect family. Now his wife is dead, possibly murdered by a lover who was a friend of their son. Something told me that this was only the beginning of the story, that there were still many unsolved mysteries in this case, and the deeper I dug, the more confusing the picture would become. But it was my job to unravel these tangles, however complicated they were. I headed back to the police station to begin the official investigation. It was a long night ahead, filled with paperwork, phone calls, and a search for Marlon Craig, the man who might hold the key to solving the murder of Nina Bridges. Marlon Craig was found at dawn in a small bar on the edge of town. He was sitting behind the bar, staring into a glass of whiskey, when patrol officers surrounded him. There was no resistance, no attempt to run, just the tired look of a man with nowhere to go. I got the call around 6 in the morning. I'd only gotten 3 hours of sleep, but the news that the prime suspect had been apprehended instantly chased away the drowsiness. 20 minutes later, I was at the station, where Marlon had already been placed in an interrogation room. As I entered the interrogation room, I saw a young man with short hair and a tired look. His hands were resting on the table, large palms with calluses from working with tools. He looked up as I entered. "Marlon Craig," I began, sitting down across from him. "I'm Detective Alvin York. Do you know why you're here?" He nodded slowly. "Because of Nina." His voice was quiet but firm, not a trace of panic or indignation, just deep fatigue. "Tell me what happened yesterday," I suggested, turning on the recorder. Marlon took a deep breath. "I arrived at her place around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We agreed to meet when Michael was at work." "Did you meet like that a lot?" Marlon: "Yes, for about 2 months. He hesitated for words. "We were close." "You mean you were having an affair?" "Yes," Marlon nodded. "It started accidentally. I went to Jason's house, but he wasn't home. Nina suggested that I wait, and we got to talking. One thing led to another. I watched his facial expressions, his gestures, his tone of voice, looking for signs of lying. But Marlon spoke straightforwardly, looking me in the eye. "What happened yesterday when you went to see her?" "We talked. She was upset, said we should stop seeing each other for a while. Then I left. She was alive and well when I left. I swear to you." "What time was that?" "I left around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 2:30. I don't remember exactly. It was consistent with the neighbors and the time of death as determined by the medical examiner." "And where did you go after that?" "Back to the shop. Worked till 5 o'clock. Then I went home, found out what had happened to Nina, and—" He shook his head. He panicked. Went to a bar, wanted to get drunk. Why would you panic if you were innocent? Marlon looked at me like a naive child. Detective, I'm a black guy who slept with the sheriff's wife, and she turned up murdered the same day I visited her. Why do you think I panicked? There was bitter truth in his words. Even in 2025, fear of law enforcement was a reality for many black men, especially in small towns in Texas. Can anyone confirm that you were in the shop after you left Nina's? My boss, Ray Johnson, and 2 other mechanics, Trevor and Keith, they all saw me there. I wrote down their names. We had to check his alibi. Did you have any conflicts with Nina? Any arguments, disagreements? Marlon shook his head negatively. Nothing serious. Just normal conversations about what we should do next. She wasn't going to leave her husband, I understood that. Did you want her to leave? He thought for a moment. I don't know what I wanted, Detective. I liked being with her. But I understood how it all looked from the outside. Jason had been my friend since I was a kid. His mother— He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. I continued asking questions for about another hour. Marlon told me how their relationship with Nina had developed, how they tried to hide their connection, how they planned their meetings. He insisted that there was no conflict between them, that he had no reason to want her dead. No murder weapon was found, I finally said. A knife with a thin blade, about 15 to 20 centimeters. You have a knife like that? I have a lot of tools, Detective. I'm a mechanic, but I didn't kill Nina. His voice remained steady. Search my house, my car, my belongings. You won't find any evidence because I didn't do it. I decided to change tactics. Did Jason know about your relationship? Marlon shuddered. No, at least I don't think so. We never discussed it. After the interrogation, I left Marlon in custody and went to Sheriff Bridges' house. Michael was temporarily housed at his brother's house, a small but cozy cottage on the opposite end of town. When I arrived, Michael was sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee. He looked even more haggard than he had the night before. The night spent thinking about his wife's death had left new wrinkles on his face. We've got Marlon Craig in custody, I said without preamble. Michael nodded slowly. He confessed? To the affair with Nina, yes. To the murder, no. I watched the sheriff's reaction carefully. He didn't seem surprised to hear about the affair, which confirmed what Marlon had said. Did you know? I asked bluntly. Michael set his cup on the table and took a deep breath. Yes, Alvin, I knew. That admission changed everything. Now Sheriff Bridges had a motive for murder too. Jealousy, betrayal. How long ago? About a month ago, he answered, staring off into the distance. I've noticed how she's changed. New clothes, more attention to appearance, classic signs. Then I saw the messages on her phone. And what did you do? Nothing at first. I hoped it would go away on its own. Then 2 weeks ago, we talked. She didn't deny it. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. And what happened next? We agreed that she would end the relationship. Michael's voice sounded tired but determined. We have 20 years of marriage behind us, Alvin. A son, a life together. I didn't want to throw it all away because of her infatuation with a younger guy. And she agreed? Yeah, said it was a mistake that she'd end it. When was this? 2 weeks ago, like I said. But she didn't. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Michael shook his head. Apparently not. I was hoping she'd keep her word. Maybe she was trying to. Yesterday she'd said she was going to break it off for good. That information was consistent with what Marlon had told me. Nina had indeed talked about the need to end their relationship. Michael, I looked him straight in the eye. I need to know where you were yesterday between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. He didn't seem offended or surprised by the question. At work, Alvin. I didn't leave the precinct building until 5 o'clock this evening. I nodded. His alibi was easy to check. Why didn't you tell me about the affair yesterday? Michael grinned bitterly. Would you have told me? At a fresh crime scene, when your wife had just been murdered? Would you be the first to tell me about her infidelity? His words made sense. Many husbands wouldn't want such details to become public, especially in a small town where everyone knew each other. Besides, Michael continued, I really believed that we could keep our family together. We talked to Nina about starting over. Maybe moving to another town where no one knows us. And she was okay with that? Yes. The sheriff nodded. At least that's what she said. We were planning a vacation together next month. The first one in years. I made a few more notes in my notebook. Michael, I have to ask. Do you have any suspicions about who might have killed Nina? The sheriff was silent for a long time, looking at his hands. I don't know, Alvin. If not Marlon, I can't imagine who else. Nina didn't have any enemies. She was a nurse, helping people. Everybody loved her. Further conversation yielded no new information. Michael seemed sincere in his grief and in his desire to find his wife's killer. If he had any secrets, he hid them skillfully. Before I left, I asked one more question. Do you know anything about Nina's health? Has she had any problems lately? Michael looked surprised. No, not that I know of. She's always been healthy. She recently had her annual physical. Everything was fine. Why do you ask? Just a routine checkup, I replied. Sometimes medical problems can be linked to a crime. Leaving Michael's house, I headed back to the station. On the way, I got a call from Rachel Thompson, the medical examiner. Detective York, I have the preliminary autopsy results. There's something interesting. I'm listening. The wound was inflicted with great force, one precise blow. The knife went between the fourth and fifth ribs, straight through the heart. A stab like that would require anatomical expertise or a lot of luck. A professional blow, I'd say so. And another thing, there's hardly any signs of a struggle. A small bruise on her left wrist, like someone grabbed her hard, but nothing to indicate a desperate struggle. She knew her attacker, I concluded. Most likely. Or the blow was so sudden that she didn't have time to resist. I thanked Rachel and continued on my way, pondering the information I'd received. A precise stab to the heart, minimal signs of a struggle, that said the killer either knew how to kill well or had a clear plan. Marlon had no medical training, but Sheriff Bridges had received military training as a young man and undoubtedly knew how to deliver a fatal blow. He had an ironclad alibi, however. The cameras at the police station should have recorded his presence at the time of the murder. Back at the station, the first thing I did was check the sheriff's alibi. The camera footage confirmed what he said. He had not left the building during the critical time period. Then I contacted the auto shop where Marlon worked. His boss, Ray Johnson, confirmed that Marlon returned to work around 1:30 and stayed until the end of his shift. Did he look like his usual self? I asked. Normal, Ray replied. Maybe a little pensive, but nothing strange. I checked with the other witnesses, the two mechanics who had worked that day. They, too, confirmed Marlon's presence in the shop. The situation was getting more and more confusing. If both Michael and Marlon were telling the truth about their whereabouts, then who had killed Nina Bridges? Searching for an answer, I went back to the crime scene evidence. Forensics had sent a full report. No prints other than the ones that were supposed to be there. No signs of forced entry. The killer was either let into the house voluntarily or had a key. The murder weapon was still missing. A search of Marlon's house and car yielded no results. If he had used a knife to kill, he had disposed of it very carefully. I decided to talk to Marlon again. When I entered the interrogation room, he was sitting in the same posture as he had been in the morning, only he looked even more tired. I checked your alibi, I began. The people at the workshop confirmed that you were there after 1 o'clock. Marlon nodded without showing surprise. But that doesn't completely clear you of suspicion. You had enough time to kill Nina before you went back to work. I didn't kill her, Marlon repeated tiredly. I had no reason to. Or maybe she told you something that made you angry, that she really wanted to end your relationship, that she chooses her husband over you? Marlon looked up. I knew she wouldn't leave her husband, Detective. I had no illusions about that. We just liked each other. I was good with her, she was good with me. But I always knew it was only temporary. I watched his face, looking for signs of lying, but all I saw was genuine weariness and humility. Did you know Sheriff Bridges was aware of your affair? Marlon froze, then shook his head slowly. Nina said he suspected something, but not that he knew for sure. She was wrong. He did know. They'd even discussed it. Agreed that she would end her relationship with you and they would keep their family together. Marlon's face contorted with surprise and pain. She didn't tell me that. Only that we needed to be careful. Maybe she was ashamed to admit it. Or maybe she planned to continue seeing you in secret despite her promise to her husband, I suggested. I don't know, Detective. I really don't know. Marlon's voice shook. If she had told me it was over, I would have accepted it. I'm not the kind of guy who doesn't know how to let go. I decided to come at it from a different angle. Sheriff Bridges couldn't have killed his wife. He's got an airtight alibi. He's on the job all day, under security cameras. Your alibi checks out after 1 o'clock too, but we still have a window of time before you went back to the shop. And you're the last person to see Nina alive. Marlon lowered his head. I understand how it looks. But I didn't kill her. I don't know who did, but it wasn't me. The interrogation continued for another hour, but brought no new information. Marlon stood firm. Yes, they were having an affair with Nina, but he didn't kill her. After the interrogation, I met with the prosecutor to discuss the case. There's not enough evidence to charge him, he said after reviewing the files. We have motive and opportunity, but no direct evidence. No murder weapon, no witnesses to the crime itself, no DNA or fingerprints to link him to the murder. But he was there. They had an affair, and he was the last person to see her alive. I objected. That's not enough for a trial, and you know it. The prosecutor shook his head. We can hold him for 72 hours, but then we'll have to either charge him or let him go. I had to agree. Despite the suspicions, we had no direct evidence against Marlon. The morning of the third day of the investigation began with a phone call. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw Rachel's name on the screen. The medical examiner had called at 6 in the morning, which meant the case was urgent. York, I answered in a sleepy, hoarse voice. Alvin, I need you to come right away. Rachel's voice sounded unusually tense. The results of the additional tests are ready. It's important. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I answered, getting out of bed. On the way to the morgue, I thought about the case Marlon Craig was still in custody, but we couldn't charge him because of the lack of evidence he had a motive. Perhaps Nina wanted to end their relationship. There was a possibility he'd been at the Bridges' house shortly before the murder, but there was no direct evidence of his guilt. There was no murder weapon, no signs of a struggle that pointed to him, and he insisted on his innocence, calmly and confidently. Sheriff Michael Bridges had a motive too. Jealousy, betrayal of his wife, but he had an absolute alibi. He was at the police station at the time of the murder, as confirmed by security footage. Something about this case didn't add up from the start. Some piece of the puzzle was missing. Perhaps the results Rachel was talking about could shed some light on the mystery. The morgue greeted me with its usual sterile coolness. Rachel was waiting in her office, a thick folder of documents on the table in front of her. Thank you for coming on such short notice, she said, pointing to the chair across from me. What I've discovered, it changes the whole picture. I'm listening. I sat down, preparing myself to hear something unusual. Rachel opened the folder and pulled out the first sheet. I've done a full tox screen and extended blood tests on Nina Bridges, she began, and found that she had the human immunodeficiency virus. I froze, trying to comprehend this information. HIV? Are you sure? Absolutely, Rachel nodded. Moreover, according to the markers in her blood, the infection was relatively recent, within the last 3 to 6 months. That's about the time she started having an affair with Marlon Craig, I said slowly. It's possible, Rachel agreed. But that wasn't all. She pulled out another document. In the pocket of Nina's robe, we found this. HIV test results from the clinic where she worked. The date on the form is the day she was killed. I took the document and scrutinized it. It was an official form with the clinic's stamp and the doctor's signature. The result was positive. She found out about the diagnosis the day she died, I said, more to myself than to Rachel. That's right. Now take a look at this. She handed me another document, the same form with the test results, but in the name of Monsieur Bridges. The date was stamped 2 days earlier. This could refer to either Michael or Nina Maria Bridges, Rachel explained. I found it among the victim's belongings, and the results are positive too. The picture was starting to take shape, and what I saw I didn't like. Do you think Nina infected her husband? Rachel shrugged. I'm a forensic scientist, not a detective. But if she was having an affair on the side, and her husband, with whom she was intimate, turned out to be infected too. It stands to reason that she could have gotten the virus from her lover and passed it on to her husband. I went through the documents one more time. The dates were crucial. If Michael Bridges found out he was HIV positive 2 days before the murder, and then found out that his unfaithful wife was the source of the infection, that changes everything, I said. Now Sheriff Bridges has a much bigger motive than just jealousy. We're talking about a terminal illness. But he has an alibi, Rachel reminded me. Surveillance cameras at the station. Yeah, but now I'm not sure I can trust that alibi. I stood up. Thank you, Rachel. You did a great job. This could be the key to the whole case. Leaving the morgue, I headed straight to the clinic where Nina worked. I needed to confirm the information about her diagnosis and see if any of her coworkers knew about it. The next step was to see if Michael Bridges had actually been at the police station at the time of the murder. I had already seen the security footage. It clearly showed that the sheriff had not left the building between 10 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening on the day of the murder. But now, with new information about the motive, I decided to check those tapes again, more thoroughly. In the video archive room, I requested all the surveillance clips from the precinct's cameras from the day of the murder. Reviewing them one by one, I scrutinized every appearance of Sheriff Bridges on the screen. Here he is entering the building around 8 o'clock in the morning. He walks down the hall to his office at 10, then appears in the break room at noon, talking to the officer on duty. Then back in his office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I stopped the tape and went back. Something was wrong. There were 2 long gaps between 10 o'clock in the morning and noon, and between noon and 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the sheriff was out of the camera's view. There were many blind spots in the precinct, and if someone knew their location, they could leave the building and return undetected. I called in a technical support officer. Please see if there are any signs of editing on these tapes. The technician spent hours checking the video using special software. Nothing, detective, he finally said. The tapes have not been edited. What about the emergency exits? Are they equipped with cameras? Not all of them. There's a fire exit near the sheriff's office. There's no camera there. I thanked the technician and walked out, thinking about the information I'd gotten. If Michael Bridges really did kill his wife, how could he do it while he was at work? And if the security footage wasn't edited, how could he leave the station undetected? The answer came when I got a call from an officer dispatched to Marlon Craig's house. Detective, we didn't find any HIV-related medication or paperwork, but Craig's neighbor said something interesting. She saw Sheriff Bridges come to his house 2 days ago, around 9 p.m. They talked on the doorstep, then the sheriff left. He looked very angry. It was exactly the same day Michael got his test results. He went straight to his wife's lover? Why? To find out if Marlon knew about his diagnosis? Or to warn him? I decided to talk to Marlon again. Maybe now that I knew about HIV, he would be more forthcoming. Marlon looked even more tired than before. 3 days in custody without charges had not been easy for him. I have new questions, I began, sitting down across from him. And they concern your health. Marlon frowned. My health? I don't understand. Do you know you have HIV? His face changed, his eyes widened with shock and fear. What? No, I don't. What are you talking about? His reaction was so genuine that I couldn't help but believe it. Marlon really didn't know about his diagnosis. Nina Bridges was HIV positive. She found out the day she died, and apparently she contracted it from you. Marlon shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. That's impossible. I'm healthy. I've always been healthy. Have you been tested? No, but I don't have any symptoms. How would I have gotten HIV? I don't do drugs. HIV can go symptom-free for years, I interrupted him. And there are many ways of transmission. Marlon covered his face with his hands. My God, if it's true. I could have infected Nina, and she... He stopped, realizing the implications. She could have infected Michael. That's right, I nodded. Sheriff Bridges found out he was HIV positive 2 days before Nina was killed. And he came to see you that same night. What did you two talk about? Marlon raised his reddened eyes to me. The sheriff didn't come to see me. A neighbor saw him at your house. No, Marlon said firmly. Michael didn't come to see me. I was home alone watching TV. No one knocked on my door. It was weird. Why would a neighbor lie about the sheriff's visit? Describe your house, I asked out of the blue. Why? Marlon was surprised. Just describe it. It's a little bungalow on Pine Street. White walls, a blue door, a small garden in front of the house. And you live there alone? Yeah, ever since I moved to Austin 4 years ago. I pretended to write down what he said, then stood up. Thanks, Marlon. We'll check your HIV status and other information. As I left the interview room, I immediately called the officer who had spoken to Marlon's neighbor. Are you sure the neighbor was talking specifically about Marlon Craig? How did she describe him? Tall guy, mid-30s, light skin, blonde hair. And his house? Yellow with a white door and a big porch. It was nothing like Marlon's description. Looks like the neighbor was talking about a completely different person. Check the address again. I think there's been a mistake. 15 minutes later, the officer called back. You're right, detective. I got the wrong address. The neighbor lives next door to Mark Cohen, not Marlon Craig. Very similar names, hence the confusion. I thanked the officer and thought deeply. So Sheriff Bridges didn't go to Marlon's house that night. But then who was this Mark Cohen? And why was the sheriff visiting him? A check of the database revealed that Mark Cohen, 32 years old, worked for a security firm that serviced, among other things, the Austin Police Department. Specifically, he was in charge of video surveillance systems. The picture was beginning to become clearer. Sheriff Bridges, after learning of his diagnosis and realizing where the infection had come from, decided to take revenge on his wife. But he needed an alibi. And who better than an employee of the security firm that runs the security cameras to help him make it look like he was at the station? I went through the footage again, now that I knew what to look for. Yeah, there was no sign of editing. But what if the recording was being looped? What if the cameras were showing pre-recorded segments with the sheriff as he left the station through the fire exit? There was one more detail to check. I went to the Bridges house, now with a search warrant. We thoroughly searched every room, paying particular attention to potential hiding places. In the garage, under the floorboards next to the workbench, we found what we were looking for, a knife with a thin blade, carefully wrapped in a cloth. Despite attempts to wash it, there were traces of blood on the blade. The lab confirmed the blood was Nina Bridges, and Michael Bridges' fingerprints were found on the handle of the knife. Now I had all the evidence. Motive, opportunity, murder weapon. It was time for the final confrontation. Michael Bridges was still living at his brother's house. When I drove up there in the late afternoon, he was sitting on the veranda, just like last time, as if he'd been waiting for me. Alvin. He nodded as I came up the steps. News? Yes, Michael, I said, sitting down beside him. A lot of news. I know you have HIV. I know you found out 2 days before Nina died. And I know you realized where the infection came from your wife, who in turn contracted it from her lover. The sheriff's face remained still, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. And I also know your alibi is bogus. You weren't at the station all day. You organized a loop on the security tapes with the help of Mark Cohen from the security firm. You left the station through the fire exit, drove home, killed Nina and came back, again undetected. Michael was silent for a long time, looking somewhere in the distance. Then he nodded slowly. You always were a good detective, Alvin. Why, Michael? I asked. Why not divorce? Why a murder? He grinned bitterly. A divorce? After she condemned me to death? After she betrayed not only our marriage, but life itself? Modern therapy allows HIV-positive people to live long and full lives, I said. It's not about longevity, Michael shook his head. It's about betrayal, absolute, unforgivable betrayal. He was silent for a moment, then continued. I came home that day around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Marlon had just left. I saw his car pulling away from the house. Nina was in the bedroom. She was getting ready for work. I showed her my test results and asked her if she knew how I got HIV. She denied everything. She said I must have contracted it during some medical procedure, but then I found the same form in her bag with a positive result. And then she confessed. Michael clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. She said she had no idea she was sick, that Marlon had never told her about his diagnosis, that she had only found out about her HIV status today. She cried, apologized, said we'd get through this together. His voice trembled. But I couldn't forgive her. Not just the affair, but the fact that she kept sleeping with me, knowing about her affair without protection from him or me. She was playing with our lives. And you decided to kill her. It was spontaneous. I didn't plan to kill her. I just saw a knife on the bedside table at some point. She'd brought it in to unpack a new blouse. And I don't remember how it happened. I only remember her eyes, full of surprise and pain. I pulled out my handcuffs. Michael Bridges, you're under arrest for the murder of Nina Bridges. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. Michael didn't resist when I handcuffed him. He looked almost relieved, as if the weight of the confession had lifted an unbearable burden from his shoulders. On the way to the station, he said only one phrase. I don't regret what I did, Alvin. I only regret letting her destroy everything we had. That same night, we released Marlon Craig. He was shaken by the news, both of the sheriff's arrest and his possible HIV status. I advised him to get tested as soon as possible and begin treatment if the result was positive. As I saw him leave the station, broken, confused, but free, I thought of the strange irony of fate. He may have been the unwitting source of the tragedy, but he himself had become one of its victims. Like Michael Bridges, who was now to spend the rest of his life in prison, carrying the double burden of murder and terminal illness. A story of passion, betrayal, and revenge had ended, leaving behind only ruined lives. But my job was done. The killer had been found, justice had been served, as far as it was possible in such confusing, tragic circumstances.